In this lecture, we are going to set up the startup.cs file. And in the startup.cs file, when you create an empty web project, there's not much in the configure services and the configure method. All we have is an app.run to associate with our iApplication builder. When the application builds, it's just writing out to the page, hello world. In this lecture, we're going to actually build our project.cs file and inject all the different services that we want to associate in this application. The only service that we won't inject is Entity Framework Core when we implement that in later sections, but I just want to set up the basis of our startup.cs file. So right here, let's implement a constructor to associate in our startup.cs file. So I'm going to type right here, public startup. And inside of this, I'm going to pass a parameter, and it's going to be a type of iHost environment, and I'm going to name it env. As you can see right here, this provides information about the web hosting environment an application is running in, so we can associate different configuration files in our development environment and also in our production environment. So right now, let's go inside of this constructor and let's put var, let's create a variable, builder equals new configuration. So right here, what we're doing is we're implementing a new configuration builder. Let's go over here and let's manage the dependency and associate it in our application. And we're going to associate the namespace and assembly of Microsoft Extensions configuration. Once we have that, we'll put in that namespace right there. Then let's go under the configuration builder associated with this variable, and let's put add JSON file. And we're going to associate the JSON file to the application settings.json, which is associated in the previous lecture that we built. So right here, let's put application settings.json. And now we have that set up right there. What we can do, typically what you'll do in your application is you'll associate after this a different app settings.json associated with the environment. So you may create multiple app settings.json to associate in your application. Just for practice, we're not going to associate it in this application, but this is typically what you'll do. You'll put add JSON. And remember, this is an order of execution. So whatever is last in the execution process, that is what will run. So let's go over here. Let's implement that new C# technique I showed you earlier. And then let's associate here app settings. And then let's put after that, and let's put the parentheses there. Let's put env to associate with our hosting environment. Let's put right here environmental name. And then from that, let's associate JSON as the extension. And then we're going to put after that this is optional. It's not required. And then we'll put optional true. And that will associate our different settings with that JSON file that we want to associate. You can go right here and you can see that this gets and sets the environment to associate with our hosting environment, whether we are in dev, production. This is what will be associated with that file that we want to pull. And then the last one we're going to put is add environmental variables. If I want to associate environmental variables on my device, I can associate those in here, and that will be pulled into my configuration builder. So now I have my configuration built right there. Let's go ahead right now and let's put if env, if our hosting environment is development, we're going to associate the user secrets, and let's put right here the method. And then we're going to put right here builder, and we're going to associate the application insights. And this is going to give us information about the insights to our application as far as when we build it, building the telemetry and seeing how our application runs from performance measures. And then let's pull in here developer mode. And we're going to associate there to be true. Let's close that out. Let's see right here. Misspelled that. So now that we have that set up, let's also associate in our configuration builder, add user secrets, which we associated in the other assembly reference. So if we're in development environment, we're going to add user secrets. Add user secrets will associate the file inside of our user profile on disk. This is typically what you'll use in a development environment, not in production. Now after that, I'm going to associate a property here. And we're going to associate an iConfiguration type. iConfiguration root configuration. And then associated with that configuration, I'm going to do a getter and setter. Close that out. And as you can see, very simple way of looking at this, you want to see with that dependencies, this represents the root of the iConfiguration hierarchy. What we're going to associate in that configuration is to associate the variable that we have built our configuration, and then we're going to call the method build. Once we do that, this is going to associate and build our configuration in the startup constructor. We've added our app settings. We've also added the choice if we want to have a different app settings per environment. We have environmental variables. We've associated if we're in development, add user secrets, add application insight settings so that we can look at the performance associated inside of our development environment. This is how we'll build our configuration to associate. So now that we have all those items, let's configure the services that we want in this application. So here, as you can see, it gives you a little hint. This method is called by the runtime. Use this method to add services to your container. So in configure services, this is what you want to associate the different services you want to inject into your application. So you can use dependency injection to associate in this application. So let's go here and let's type from the parameter right here. We have an iService collection. It's an interface and we're associating a service parameter here. So we're going to say services.add application insight telemetry. And then inside of that, we want to associate our configuration. We're going to close that out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to just add services.add MVC. We want to add MVC to this application. So we want to be able to utilize MVC, and then in the configure method, we are going to associate the routes with our MVC. So now that we have our configure services set up right there, in future lectures I will add entity framework to the configure services, but right now I just want to associate MVC and application insights. In the configure method, this is where we're going to associate our routes with MVC, but we're going to add a few more parameters. We have the iApplication parameter, which defines a class which provides mechanisms to configure the request pipeline. I'm also going to add here an iHosting environment. And as we said before, this provides information about your web hosting environment. We're going to associate env. And then here we're going to put an iLogger. And this is going to associate with logging different errors in your application, whether you want to log the performance or what's being called in the application. We're going to associate an iLogger factory here. And let's type that. And then we'll pull in that dependency. So as you can see here, once we hover over it, we can show potential fixes. We can use Microsoft Extension logging. And right now we can configure our logging services in our application. We can put it to the console. We can also add it to the debug status. So now let's go ahead and start building this. And let's go logger factory to associate this parameter. And then let's put right here, add console. We're going to add the console to be able to be log level information or higher here. And then let's put configuration. And then let's associate get section. And then we want to associate their logging. Now that we have that set, let's close that out right there. And then we also want to add the logger factory to debugging. And then we can do is press here. We're looking for that method, add debug. And as you can see right here, you can always read, if you don't understand what method's being implemented, you can see the extension adds a debug logger that is enabled for logger level information or higher. Let's add that. Let's close that out. And then what we're going to associate with our application builder is app.use application insight request telemetry. And we want to associate that right there to be able to use telemetry to look at the performance associated with our application. And then what we want to associate this is that if we're in development environment, similar to what we did in the configure method, we want to associate here, use browser link. And you can see, and this associates right here, configures the application to connect with Visual Studio using browser link right there. And then we also want to put app.use development exception page. It captures synchronous and asynchronous exceptions from the pipeline that generates HTML errors. Full error details are only displayed if host.app mode is set to development. So while we're in development mode, we're going to see all the associated .NET errors in our web page. If we're not in development, we're in production, this will not be displayed to the user. So it's a way to inject whatever services for whatever environment you're in inside of your configure method. So like here, let's put that. And then what we can do, if we're in that mode, we can say else. We can associate an error page. So let's go over here and let's just put use exception handler. On our home controller, we can create an error method. So let's go over here and let's just see we have right here for controllers, home controller. Let's put right here, home error. So this will look for the method associated with the controller error, and then it will also look at the view associated with the naming convention in the home folder of error. So in the development environment, we will use the developer exception page. In actual production, we will use an error page associated in our MVC routes. So now you can see right here, I'm using already by default the IIS platform handler. This adds the middleware for interacting with the IIS HTTP platform handler reverse proxy module. This will handle forwarded Windows authentication request schemes. You need this to be able to run locally IIS or even a production server. And then what we want to associate here is app.use static files, so that everything in the www root will be able to be emitted in our application. And then finally, what I want to do right here, I want to get rid of this app run. I want to associate our MVC routes. The app run associated right here is just with the context writing out a page of hello world. Right here, we want to associate our MVC routes. So right here, let's do app.use MVC. And in that, let's go ahead and let's put a value here, routes. And then let's put this. And then we want to associate with the routes map route. And in the map route here, let's associate this. Close this out here. And let's put here name. And let's put default. And then from there, let's put template. And let's put our template to associate in our application. So here we're going to put our controller. And it's going to be equal to home, which is associated over here, the home controller. And then what we're going to associate there is the action, and the default action is going to be index. Final item is we're going to make an ID not required. And then we're going to close that out here. Let's format that. So look what we have here. We have our routes to associate in our application. We're using the MVC extension right here. And then we have routes, and the routes is pointing to map route. The default name is default for this route. And the template is associating with the home controller, the action index, and then what it's associating here is the ID within this. This is associated in our application here. So now that we have the routes associated with our application, when the public static void method is associated, it's going to emit this point right here. This is the entry point for the application. And now we have everything set inside of our startup method, inside of our configure services, and then we've added the different logging associated with debugging. We also added all the different routes associated with MVC. We added the IIS platform handler. We added the static file emission from the www root folder. So we've pretty much set up the configuration for our application. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture.